And welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today we're going to talk about Mary, Queen of Scots.
One day we will be remembered.
Mary's council was made up of 16 men, and only 4 of them were Catholic. The other 12 were Protestant. This likely wasn't an accident or even mismanagement. She was still angling to become Queen of England. Her father's cousin, Queen Elizabeth, was Queen of England, but she had no children or a husband. If she died without heirs, Queen Mary thought she had a chance to be named Elizabeth's successor, but not if she seemed too anti-Protestant. Queen Mary sent an ambassador to England to plead her case, but Queen Elizabeth was worried that if she named a successor, specifically a Catholic successor, there would be plots to kill her and replace her with whoever she named. She likely didn't trust Mary, who had already tried to claim her country once before. Elizabeth did admit to Mary's ambassador that she felt that Mary had the best claim after her if she did die without children. A meeting was set up for the 2 queens to meet, but it never materialized, as it was canceled by Queen Elizabeth. Mary decided to set her attention on finding a new husband, because she also still had no heir to inherit her throne. Her uncle, the Cardinal of Lorraine, began negotiations for her hand with Archduke Charles of Austria, without her consent. He was the son of Ferdinand, the Holy Roman Emperor, the great-nephew of Catherine of Aragon. They were still treating her like the same little girl queen she used to be. And while she was still quite young, at the age of 19, she wasn't still the 5-year-old little girl that they had sent to France. She angrily objected to this match, and negotiations fell apart rather quickly without her cooperation. She attempted to negotiate her own marriage agreement with Don Carlos, the mentally unstable heir apparent of Spain, and the cousin of Charles of Austria. Their fathers had been brothers, but this was rebuffed by his father, King Philip of Spain, the same King Philip that had been married to Mary, the first Queen of England. For that story, check out Queen Mary's episode in season 1. It's a big spider web, guys. Queen Elizabeth had a plan to neutralize Mary in the marriage market. She suggested that Mary marry Lord Robert Dudley. If you listen to Queen Elizabeth the first episode, you may remember him. He was Queen Elizabeth's married possible love interest, the one whose wife died in a tragic accident or a tragic not-so accident. For those details, check out Elizabeth the first episode. Elizabeth thought that if she sent her friend and potential boyfriend to the Scottish court, he would be on her side, and maybe even do a little English spying. Queen Elizabeth sent an ambassador to Queen Mary to make this suggestion, and added that if she married an English noble, Queen Elizabeth would consider suggesting Mary as her heir. But this didn't seem like a very solid agreement, and Queen Mary was still very Catholic, and Dudley was still very Protestant. And not just because Mary was unwilling. It seems like Robert Dudley was also unwilling. He may have been Queen Elizabeth's boyfriend, but he wasn't hers to pimp out. A French poet at Scottish court, however, seemed to be completely smitten with the Scottish queen. In 1563, when Queen Mary was just 21 years old, this poet was discovered during a security search hiding under the queen's bed. He said he was planning on surprising the queen when she was alone to profess his love. Queen Mary was horrified to find this out and had her poet banished from Scotland. There. Don't hide in people's rooms without their permission, guys. It's creepy. On his part, he ignored his banishment order. If he ignored it, it just didn't exist, right? 2 days later, he forced his way into her chamber as she was about to undress for the evening. She responded in anger and then fear, because that's what we call stalking, folks. She called out for help, and her half-brother, Moray, heard her calls and rushed in. Queen Mary yelled out to her brother, "Thrust your dagger into the villain!" But Moray refused, because the poet was already apprehended and restrained. He was later tried for treason and then executed. There were rumors that he was not actually infatuated with the queen, that he was instead a Huguenot, in other words, a French Protestant trying to discredit her by tarnishing her reputation. Queen Mary had briefly met her English-born half-cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, when she was still in mourning for her husband, King Francois. Mary and Darnley were both grandchildren of Margaret Tudor, the sister of King Henry VIII. Check out Margaret Tudor's episode for those details. He was tall, like her, maybe because they were cousins. He was over 6 feet tall, and Queen Mary fell in love with Lord Darnley. They married in 1565 when Mary was 22 and Darnley was 18. They had not, however, obtained permission from the Pope to get married as half-cousins. Elizabeth's advisors had helped set up the deal and were working on getting Darnley's travel papers ready to head to Scotland when Queen Elizabeth started having second thoughts about this marriage. While neither of them had a stronger claim than Elizabeth, they both did have a claim, and maybe people would see their joint claim as valid, and any children they had together would definitely have a strong claim. But Mary was insistent on this marriage. The saying is that surely she is bewitched, and the marriage could only be averted by violence. Elizabeth was furious. Darnley was her subject, and she thought she should have a say in who he married. The Scottish queen couldn't just marry an English subject whenever she wanted, but she had. And Darnley was Catholic, so this didn't go over well with the Protestants. Queen Mary's half-brother, James, remember Moray? He agreed with the Protestants, and he joined them in open rebellion. In what became known as the Chase-About Raid, cute name, Mary and her forces and James with the rebellious lords roamed around Scotland without ever engaging in direct combat. In 1566, when Queen Mary was 23 years old, she was expecting. Mary's marriage wasn't going great. Her husband wanted the crown matrimonial. That would make him co-regnant with his wife instead of her consort. The main difference being whether he was allowed to keep the crown if she died or was killed first. Mary said no. Henry was angry. Matt Smith would totally play him in this movie. He is a petulant husband with a queen for a wife. Well, rumors spread that he was also not the father of her baby. Word on the street was that her private secretary was her baby daddy, but those rumors might have just been spread by her irritated husband. But then her husband and his bros assassinated her private secretary, stabbed him to death right in front of a very pregnant Mary. So she's just out with her secretary and maybe boyfriend, and her husband and his bros show up, and they get all stabby. What the hell, James? Who's gonna secretary now? She was too pregnant for this drama. Mary's baby was born the 19th of June, 1566, and he was named Prince James, presumably after Queen Mary's father, King James V. And that is where we get the Stuart loophole. Mary's baby daddy's last name was Stuart also because they were cousins. The spelling of the royal name did change at this time, though. My notes have it changed from Stuart to Stewart, but that means nothing in audio form. So it changed from Stuart, spelled Stewart, to Stuart, spelled Stuart. But this was because Mary Queen of Scots was more French than Scottish, and the French just did not get the spelling with the W. They could not work that W out. So it just changed to the French spelling of Stuart, a U-A-R-T. But the Stuart family line didn't end because my girl married her cousin and found a loophole. But the marriage after the murder of her secretary was likely beyond repair. Mary experienced a series of unfortunate and suspicious events. When her baby James was 4 months old, she made an 8-hour round trip by horseback to visit James Hepburn, Lord Bothwell, after hearing that he was ill with wounds he had sustained in battle. Immediately after her return, she suffered from a serious illness that included frequent vomiting, loss of sight, loss of speech, convulsions, and periods of unconsciousness. She was thought to be dying. Her recovery from the 25th of October onwards was credited to the skill of her French physicians. But the cause of her illness is still unknown. Potential diagnoses include physical exhaustion, mental stress, hemorrhage of a gastric ulcer, and porphyria. But we don't know, and it sounds so sus. Like maybe poison sus. The following month, a meeting was called by her to discuss the problem with Darnley. Divorce was mentioned, and the lords present vowed to get rid of Darnley at any cost. It was thought expedient and most profitable for the Commonwealth that such a young fool and proud tyrant should not reign or bear rule over them, that he should be put off by one way or another, and whoever should take the deed in hand or do it, they should defend. Darnley then became ill with fever due to smallpox, syphilis, or poison. He was ill for weeks, but he didn't die. Mary invited her estranged husband back to court to recuperate, and he took her up on the offer. Maybe they were getting back together. On the night of February 9th, 1567, Mary visited her husband in the early evening. Then remembered she had to go to a wedding of one of her servants. She's got to go. Like, oops, my bad. There's a wedding. I got to get there now. In the early hours of the morning, the house her husband was staying at exploded. Her husband had managed to escape outside, but then he was found dead in the garden, smothered. There were no signs of violence or strangulation on the body. Queen Elizabeth wrote to her cousin, "I should ill fulfill the office of a faithful cousin or an affectionate friend if I did not tell you what all the world is thinking. Men say that instead of seizing the murderers, you are looking through your fingers while they escape, that you will not seek revenge on those who have done you so much pleasure, as though the deed would never have taken place had not the doers of it been assured of impunity. For myself, I beg you to believe that I would not harbor such a thought." An investigation was done, and Bothwell was charged, but he was acquitted after a 7-hour trial. Just a week later, Bothwell managed to convince more than 24 lords and bishops to sign the Ainsley Tavern Bond, in which they agreed to support his aim to marry the Queen. Between the 21st and the 23rd of April, 1567, Mary visited her son and was abducted on the way home, willingly or not, by Bothwell. She was taken to Dunbar Castle, where she may have been raped. On the 6th of May, they returned to Edinburgh. On the 15th of May, they were married in a Protestant ceremony. Bothwell had divorced his first wife 12 days earlier. Originally, Mary believed that many nobles supported her marriage, but it turns out they didn't. Both Catholics and Protestants had issues with her marrying the man accused of murdering her husband. The lords took Mary to Edinburgh, where crowds of spectators denounced her as an adulteress and a murderer. The following night, she was imprisoned on an island in the middle of Loch Leven. Between the 20th and the 23rd of July, Mary miscarried twins. On the 24th of July, she was forced to abdicate in favor of her 1-year-old son, James. Moray was made regent, while Bothwell was driven into exile. He was imprisoned in Denmark and became insane and died in 1578. On the 2nd of May, 1568, Mary escaped with the aid of George Douglas, brother of the castle's owner. Managing to raise an army of 6,000 men, she met Moray's smaller forces on the 13th of May. But she was defeated, and she fled south to England by fishing boat on the 16th of May. On the 18th of May, local officials took her into protective custody. Mary expected Elizabeth to help her regain her throne. Elizabeth was cautious, ordering an inquiry into the conduct of the Confederate lords and the questions of whether Mary was guilty of Darnley's murder. As an anointed queen, Mary refused to acknowledge the power of any court to try her. She was a queen. She was like, you can't boss me around. She refused to attend the inquiry at York personally, but sent representatives. Elizabeth forbade her attendance anyway. As evidence against Mary, Moray presented the so-called casket letters, 8 unsigned letters, purportedly from Mary to Bothwell, 2 marriage contracts, and a love sonnet or sonnets. All were said to have been found in a silver gilt casket, just less than 1 foot, 30 centimeters long, and decorated with the monogram of King Francois II. Mary denied writing them and insisted they were forgeries, arguing that her handwriting was not difficult to imitate. The authenticity of the casket letters has been a source of much controversy among historians. It is impossible now to prove either way. The originals, written in French, were possibly destroyed in 1584 by Mary's son. The surviving copies, in French or translated into English, do not form a complete set. There are incomplete printed transcriptions in English, Scots, French, and Latin from the 1570s. For overriding political reasons, Elizabeth wished to neither convict nor acquit Mary of murder. On the 26th of January, 1569, Mary was moved to Tutbury Castle and placed in the custody of the Earl of Shrewsbury and his formidable wife, Bess of Hardwicke. Elizabeth considered Mary's designs on the English throne to be a serious threat, and so confined her to Shrewsbury's properties. Mary was permitted her own domestic staff, which never numbered fewer than 16. She needed 30 carts to transport her belongings from house to house. In May 1569, Elizabeth attempted to mediate a restoration of Mary in return for guarantees of the Protestant religion, but a convention held in Perth rejected the deal overwhelmingly. Norfolk continued to scheme for a marriage with Mary, and Elizabeth imprisoned him in the Tower of London between October 1569 and August 1570. Early the following year, Moray was assassinated. His death occurred soon after an unsuccessful rebellion of North England, led by Catholic earls, which persuaded Elizabeth that Mary was a threat. In 1584, Mary proposed an association with her son James. She announced that she was ready to stay in England, to renounce the Pope's bull of excommunication, and to retire, abandoning her pretensions to the English crown. She also offered to join an offensive league against France. For Scotland, she proposed a general amnesty, agreed that James should marry with Elizabeth's knowledge, and accepted that there should be no change in religion. Her only condition was the immediate alleviation of the conditions of her captivity. She wanted out. James went along with the idea for a while, but eventually rejected it and signed an alliance treaty with Queen Elizabeth, abandoning his mother. Elizabeth also rejected the association because she did not trust Mary to cease plotting against her during the negotiations. On the 11th of August, 1586, after being implicated in the Babington plot, Mary was arrested while out riding. In a successful attempt to entrap her, Walsingham had deliberately arranged for Mary's letters to be smuggled out of Chartley. Mary was misled into thinking her letters were secure, while in reality they were deciphered and read by Walsingham. From these letters it was clear that Mary had sanctioned an attempted assassination on Queen Elizabeth. Mary was moved to Fotheringay Castle in a 4-day journey, ending on the 25th of September. In October, she was put on trial for treason under the Act for the Queen's Safety, before the court of 36 noblemen, including Cecil, Shrewsbury, and Walsingham. Spirited in her defense, Mary denied the charges. She told her triers, "Look at your conscience and remember, the theater of the world is wider than the kingdom of England." She protested that she had been denied the opportunity to review the evidence, that her papers had been removed from her, and that she was denied access to legal counsel, and that as a foreign appointed queen, she had never been an English subject, and thus could not be convicted of treason. She was convicted on the 25th of October and sentenced to death. Nevertheless, Elizabeth hesitated to order the execution, even in the face of pressure from English Parliament to carry out the sentence. She was concerned that killing a queen set a discreditable precedent, and was fearful of the consequences because she too was a queen, especially if, in retaliation, Mary's son James formed an alliance with the Catholic powers and invaded England. On the 1st of February, 1587, Queen Elizabeth signed Queen Mary's death warrant. Queen Mary spent the last hours of her life in prayer, distributing her belongings to her household and writing her will and letter to the King of France. The scaffold that was erected in the great hall was draped with black cloth. It was reached by 2 or 3 steps and furnished with a block and a cushion for her to kneel on. The executioner and his assistant knelt before her and asked for forgiveness, as was typical for the executioner to request pardon of the one being put to death. Mary replied, "I forgive you with all of my heart, for now, I hope, you shall make an end to all my troubles." Her servants, Jane Kennedy and Elizabeth Curl, and the executioners helped Mary remove her outer garments, revealing a velvet petticoat and a pair of sleeves in crimson brown, the liturgical color of martyrdom in the Catholic Church, with a black satin bodice and black trimmings. As she disrobed, Mary smiled and said, "Never had such grooms before, nor ever put off her clothes in such a company." She was blindfolded by Kennedy, with a white veil embroidered in gold, and knelt on the cushion in front of the block where she positioned her head and stretched out her arms. Mary was not beheaded with a single strike. The first blow missed her neck and struck the back of her head. The second blow severed her neck, except for a small bit of sinew, which the executioner then cut through using his axe. Afterward, he held her head aloft and declared, "God save the Queen." At that moment, the auburn tresses in his hand turned out to be a wig, and the head fell to the ground, revealing that Queen Mary had very short gray hair. When the news of this execution reached Elizabeth, she became indignant and asserted that Davidson had disobeyed her instructions not to part with the warrant, and the Privy Council had acted without her authority. She was like, "Guys, no, you were supposed to ask my permission a second time before sending out this death warrant." But she had signed it, so plausible deniability, I guess. She claimed that this was not her thing. She didn't do this, but she did do this. And that is where I'll leave it for now. What did you think of Mary, Queen of Scots? She was queen when she was 6 days old and raised in a foreign country. I don't think she stood much of a chance at all. She wasn't set up for success. And with that, we have come to the end of season 2. I hope you enjoyed the royal family of Scotland. I did. I had fun. And I hope you join me for season 3, where I will be covering the royal family of France, because they definitely fit into this spiderweb puzzle. Thank you to everyone who listened and to everyone who joined me this season as a guest on my podcast. I've had a lot of fun, and I'm just hoping it keeps going. Long live to all the queens out there. And until next time, bye.
Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.